All right. Our leader for tonight's Tradition 5 workshop session is Mr. Al J. And following his presentation, we will have an opportunity to ask any questions. This is September 16th, 2024 at Delray Beach Nunes Treasure in the Traditions Workshop. Tradition 5 with Mr. Al J. Tradition 5 reads, each Alcoholics Anonymous group ought to be a spiritual entity, having but one primary purpose, that of carrying its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. Mr. Al, please, the floor is yours.
All right, Al Alcoholic, I'd like to thank you for inviting me on. I believe what you're doing here is very important in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm going to go ahead and get on with this. I think I said I'm an alcoholic. I'll say it again just in case I forgot. In spite of the great increase in the size and span of the fellowship, at its core, it remains simple and personal. Each day somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. And that's forward to the 3rd edition. I just love that because it says so much in so little wording there, just in almost a paragraph. It really sums this thing up. I'm not a bleeding deacon. I'm not an expert, and I'm not a benign dictator. I looked up the word benign. It means a kind or friendly dictator. I think that we bring this message across without baseball bats and billy clubs, know-it-allism, and trying to straighten people out. I don't think that works in the long run. It might get some people's attention, but it will alienate more people than it will bring in. And one thing we want to do is we want to be careful of things that we do that separate us from each other. Our communication here is really important. And what somebody told me years ago, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And I just think that's so important. If we're going to get attention on this very critical subject of the second legacy and our primary purpose, I think it's going to be done with the way that we communicate this. I believe that we are lacking in this big, beautiful fellowship that I love so much in the second legacy. And I think that it's our fault. The older members, the middle members, I don't pick on the newcomers because they don't know any better. It's up to us as older members of Alcoholics Anonymous to be clear about our steps, be clear about our traditions, so we're more effective in teaching this. My second sponsor always said that most of the problems in this area go back to sponsorship and home groups. And I'm not sure that that's not correct. All right, one of the that I like is information on Alcoholics Anonymous. It's on our website. It breaks some things down. It has some important ideas in there. It's very simple. It's taken from other places, but it's an important piece of information. And people can look at it and simplify things. Okay, identification here is what we're really going to start talking about as we go into the long form of the 5th tradition. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, we have 3 sets of traditions. We have the short form. Earl Treat, he meant well when he wrote those to condense them so the alcoholic would pay attention to them. He thought they might get lost in the long form. And we have found that it has caused some trouble and some misunderstanding. Just like the short form of the steps on the wall, without the big book and the 12 and 12, a lot of people overthink them off the wall and they come up with bizarre ideas about the steps. So identification is key here. And our first step, when we start to share this in our meetings, what happens is we start to contaminate it with a lot of different things that don't belong in there. We admitted we're powerless over alcohol, not our addictions. We admitted we're powerless over alcohol, not everything that takes us out of reality. We admitted we're powerless over alcohol, not people, places, and things in the first step. This is the medical bad news that Silkworth shared with Wilson, and Wilson shared with Dr. Bob, that changed his life and Bill's forever. It's a very, very important step, and if we contaminate it with so many different things, what we do is we start to blur the identification, and I'm going to get into that as we get into this fifth tradition. The medical bad news is the obsession, the physical allergy or phenomenon of craving, the progression, and the unmanageability that is caused by an alcoholic's drinking. And what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous is we start to bring all our problems back into being powerless and unmanageable, and all of a sudden we've got 15, 20 things out there. And I'm one that believes that the first step should be left alone, and if there's problems in sobriety, I think the third step really sums up what you're talking about with leaving the first step alone. If we can keep that and we can share our own experience around this in our own way and keep that identification very clear, we become more effective as a fellowship than blurring it. All right, we almost made a mistake here in the manuscript in 1938. Brought out the 12th step, having had a spiritual experience as a result of this course of action. We tried to carry this message to others. There it was. Especially alcoholics, and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Now, the printing in April of 1939 of the first edition, it didn't make it in there. They got rid of others, and I think that is really important because that could have caused a lot of problems. Just like a desire to stop drinking is manipulated by a lot of people and turned against us because they didn't look at the third tradition long form or the AA comes of age or even the 12 and 12, what it's talking about. It's a little bit more than that. Our friends, the Washingtonians, we learned something from that. Our traditions weren't created out of the Washingtonians. Our traditions came from our own experience, but we did learn something. Bill got a letter, we say, in 1945. He was already had letters, and they were already working on these safeguards for our fellowship. But the person made Wilson aware of the Washingtonians and the fact they lost their purpose, and they crashed and burned. They didn't totally disappear like the dinosaurs, but they crashed and burned, and they were doing pretty good out of the gate because they were working with drunkards. That word alcoholic wasn't really created yet. They were inebriants or drunkards. And I love this picture because it really sums it up. And the Washingtonians were good-hearted people. They meant well. They cared about the alcoholic, and they had some success in the short run. But they got involved in religion from the inside and outside. They got involved in politics from the inside and outside. They got involved in making money. Their convention speakers started to make money and come up with different points of views. And they lost their purpose. And that's what we need to learn, that the Washingtonians were very effective coming out of the gate, but they didn't last very long because they lost that purpose or that focus that's so important for us. All right, so Bill, 1946, I love it. The 12 points to assure our future, and I love that. Because this is what we're starting to talk about. It's, you know, we talk about in AA, and I really like the idea. It's not all about me. And we come up with this idea in the first tradition, our common welfare, that we're a small part of a great whole. And it's really important that I'm a small part of a great whole. And what the traditions are asking us to do is sacrifice our personal desires and ambitions for the common welfare. And the backbone, if you ask anybody, well, what's the common welfare? It's a good question to ask because a lot of times you think, well, the common welfare. Well, the backbone of the common welfare is the fifth tradition, okay, of what our purpose is. And Wilson said AA only has one purpose. It only has one purpose, and that's to carry the message to the alcoholic who still suffers. No, there's no other purpose here. He says, if you're going to have a temper tantrum here, you don't like us, you want to jump up and down and give us whatever and yell at us, You can take all of this. The only thing that you can't have is our name, Alcoholics Anonymous. Take the rest of it. We have one purpose here. And we sacrifice for the whole of Alcoholics Anonymous that brings about unity. And unity, our togetherness or oneness, equals our survival. We're talking about our survival in the future, not just today, but for the alcoholic 50 years when most of us are in the big meeting in the sky, has the same opportunity here that we have. And some of the problems we have today, early on, they didn't necessarily have, and a lot of these problems have been here for a long time. They've gotten bigger. We're surrounded by a treatment center industry with different wordings, professional industry. We're not in conflict with them. I don't think it's their problem. I think it's our problem. We're surrounded by at least 100 other fellowships that AA members come back in with their language sometimes, and it's very confusing. Alcoholics Anonymous out of the gate didn't have those troubles. That's why understanding what an AA group, as I get into it, is so important. The difference between a meeting and an AA group. All right, I like my thesaurus. I think dictionaries limit words. I always go to the thesaurus and I look for strong matches that make sense to me. Long form of the fifth tradition, each Alcoholics Anonymous group ought to be a spiritual entity. So I looked for strong matches. Structure, I love that word. An AA group has structure to it. It's not a meeting, just a gathering. A whole, I like that idea, the idea of a whole entity, a vital force. I like that idea, strong match in the thesaurus. Reality, I also like that word. And then I was surprised that the word single was there. You know, that's really hard on an alcoholic personality, is single, okay? Somehow we like multiples. I noticed that in the long form of the traditions. Recount it for me. I noticed group was mentioned 17 times in the long form of all the traditions. Meetings not mentioned at all. All right, I love this. 1980, the AA group pamphlet had this in it. I believe till 1991 when they took it out of it. And that was a 6-point definition of an AA group. All members of a group are alcoholics, and all alcoholics are eligible for membership. As a group, they are fully self-supporting. A group's primary purpose is to help alcoholics recover through the 12 steps. As a group, they have no outside affiliation. We're going to start talking about that very important word, affiliation. As a group, they have no opinion on outside issues. And as a group, their public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. They always maintain anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. I wish they had kept that in there. I don't really like the new illustrations that they have put on our pamphlets. It seems to me that they are more clinical. It's something I would find in a hospital brochure. That's just my own pet peeve. You know, I like doing these presentations, not so much to prove any point or right or wrong, but maybe awareness and maybe just to think for a minute. Some of the stuff in AA's, it's been here for a long time and it's going to be here. What's important is that I think as a fellowship, we learn what an AA group is and we really understand that pamphlet, because that will enhance the clarity of our singleness of purpose. Whoops, sorry about that. I was trying to move this thing over because I couldn't read Most of us cannot recover unless there is a group, as Bill said. Realization dawns on each member that he is but a small part of a great whole. He learns that the clamor of desires and ambitions within him must be silenced whenever these could damage the group. It's very, very important, that surrender. And the second major surrender is in that second legacy. We have hundreds in the first legacy. We talk about them all the time. But that second major surrender is to give up my desires and ambitions, my need to be right in situations, and make sure that I'm not doing things that separate or damage the group. It becomes plain that the group must survive or the individual will not. This AA group is the most important. Now, this morning I was at a club here. I'm in Florida. I went down there. It was a meeting. I didn't have to ask them. I went to an AA meeting today. An alcoholic and an addict was the chairman. People kept getting up and walking around and having coffee. This person was talking about something. This person was talking. They were nice people. And I'm not mad at those groups. I don't try to straighten you out. I still go to them. I try to be helpful when I'm in them and carry a clear message that doesn't alienate them, but maybe draws people towards you. So maybe they ask, hey, wow, what you said, I haven't heard. Where'd you get that from? So we can be helpful in those situations rather than critical. One lady in there was sharing, and she's probably a good example. I wouldn't know, but she probably needed, maybe she suffered from other conditions and complications. But there was no clarity to that group. There was no structure to that group. That's why it was an AA meeting. It was a gathering. They didn't have anything to do once, in our AA group pamphlet, it says one thing that separates the group from a meeting is that outside the group time, we're doing things. We have an intergroup rep, or we're carrying the message online, or we're carrying the message in hospitals or institutions. We're doing different things. In Alcoholics Anonymous, that group is extending itself from its meeting time. All right, so now Bill comes up with problems other than alcohol, 1958. Okay. So in the AA group pamphlet, it says the primary purpose of any AA group is to carry an AA message to alcoholics. Experience with alcohol is one thing all AA members have in common. It's misleading to hint or give an impression that AA solves other problems or knows what to do about drug addiction. And that gets a lot of people upset. Most of us are not pure alcoholics. We learn from sponsorship and 3 legacy home groups how to surrender those different things in us. And really what happened to me, I lost my drug story. I became more an alcoholic the longer I stay here. It's just not a big deal to me. I don't have any andas anymore. I'm an alcoholic, and I'm very comfortable with that because it makes my life very simple. Now, there are certain things that AA cannot do for anybody, regardless of what our several desires or sympathies may be. And there it is. I highlighted it. That gets us into trouble. Again, I have to surrender that. We're compassionate people when we get sober after a while, at least most of us, not all, but most of us, we have a heart for people. But it says, wait, this AA group, we can't, regardless of what our several desires, our first duty as a society is to ensure our own survival. Therefore, we have to avoid distractions and multi-purpose activity. An AA group as such cannot take on all the personal problems of its members, let alone the problems of the whole world. Sobriety, freedom from alcohol through the teaching and practice of the 12 steps is the sole purpose of an AA group. Groups have repeatedly tried other activities and they have always failed. I love that. They have always failed. It doesn't say sometimes they fail. They have always failed. It has also been learned there's no possible way to make non-alcoholics into AA members. We have to confine our membership to alcoholics, and we have to confine our AA groups to a single purpose. If we don't stick to these principles, we shall almost surely collapse. If we collapse, we can't help anybody. Survival of the group is it's the objective here, because that's where people recover. They come to a clear-minded group on singleness of purpose about what our message is, what our traditions are. You don't have the argument of, I have a desire to stop drinking, I can bring all the rest of this, because we'll show you the long form of the third tradition. And one thing that it says, and I like like to share on this is that it talks about not having conformity for membership. It's talking about all that suffer from alcoholism. It doesn't matter as long as you're suffering from alcoholism. You don't have to conform to be a member. There's no rules on you. You say you're in when you say you're in. Nobody can kick you out. But my life in the group depends on conformity. If I'm going to stay here as an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm going to have to surrender my desires and ambitions for the greater good of Alcoholics Anonymous and for the greater good of my group. All right, 2 storm signals. I love this. In the 4th tradition, Bill says there's 2 storm signals. An AA group ought to not do anything which will greatly injure AA as a whole. And AA as a whole is made up of groups. But there's also another storm signal that's very important, and that's it affiliate itself with anything or anybody. And I'm going to show you some things here in a minute. So there are 2 storm signals, not one. Okay, affiliation and also things that would greatly injure AA as a whole or our group next door. So we have to be very respectful, I think, of things that we do in our AA community in our group. It's very important. We have to think outside the box, not just about me, but about we. All right, so I went through some meeting. I went through the guides, just about 4 or 5. I'm not going to tell you what part of the country. I could have found a lot more, but I just found enough to get your attention. Batman's men's meetings. Do you think there's singleness? I want you just to think. I'm not accusing, indicting them. All queer, no beer. I don't have any problem with anybody's sexuality. I've never lost sleep over it. Alcoholics Anonymous is interested in you being an alcoholic, not your sexuality. Sunrise Zoom meeting. Now, think about this for a minute. How many of us have been guilty of saying, I'm going to a Zoom meeting tonight, or that AA Zoom meeting? Well, Zoom is a platform we rent by a corporation. A Zoom meeting means we have an affiliation. I know we don't mean anything. That's how some of this starts, is we don't really mean it, but we say it. And then the newcomer hears that. That's an affiliation. It's probably better to say I'm going to an online AA meeting than it is to say I'm going to a Zoom meeting. But we don't think. Sometimes we do it and we don't even think about it, but it's sitting there. That long form of the 6th tradition, and if you look at the 6th tradition, it is so much about singleness of purpose. I just love it. I think we find it in all the traditions, but and it talks about, and I'm going to show you that, actual or implied affiliation. Okay. So in the AA group pamphlet, it talks about naming an AA group, no matter how noble the activity or institution. Experience has taught us AA groups to carefully avoid any affiliation with an endorsement or any outside enterprise outside AA. And Zoom is one of them. Our AA group conscience, as voiced by the General Service Conference, has recommended that family meetings, double trouble, alcohol and pill meetings not be listed in our AA directories. The use of the word family might also invite confusion with Al-Anon family groups. A fellowship's entirely separate from AA, and I think that's pretty important. And it's hard sometimes because we have members that are in both fellowships, and when it comes in, it can become confusing because there's 2 different languages. We have to be aware of that. The primary purpose of any AA group is to carry a message to alcoholics. Experience with alcohol is one thing all AA members have in common. It's misleading to hint that we give the impression that AA solves other problems or knows what to do about drug addiction. There it is again. I just wanted to repeat that. That gets on people's nerves, but it's okay. If you mention that you did a drug, that's different in AA. None of us are going to fall out of our seat, but drug addiction is an outside issue. Now, how about, whoops, sorry about that. I'm moving through here, trying to move this out. Okay. How about this? Alcoholics with depression. That's in the Richmond, in my area. They had a fight in the intergroup and at the district. Should that be in there? And they never took it out, but they did take their group number away, their group ID, but they put it back in there. Double D's dual diagnosis women's. Now think about that. Double D's dual diagnosis women's. How about let go and let yoga? Geeks who don't drink. Rambo, get your hiney out of bed. You don't think our singleness of purpose is not misunderstood or sometimes under attack here, and sometimes knowingly and sometimes maybe not knowingly? Again, Bill's going to repeat something very important in the sixth tradition. We'd spill AA into the dark regions of dope addiction and criminality. We'd form groups of depressive and paranoid folks. The deeper the neurosis, the better we liked it. It stood to reason that if alcoholism could be licked, so could any other problem. And then Bill says, whoa, calm down, buddy. He took us in a different direction. And it's so great because we started out with the ego. We were getting too big for our britches. And the 12 traditions are genius. They preserve our survival if we understand them. All right. NA World Board of Trustees 1985 comes out with Bulletin 13. They said in there that Bill Wilson hit a 10 strike on single purpose, avoiding semantic confusion. And here's what they said, and I love it. And this was printed twice in our AA Grapevine. Excerpts up from it. One of AA's co-founders often said that one of AA's greatest strengths is its single-minded focus on one thing and one thing only. By limiting its primary purpose to carrying the message to alcoholics and avoiding all other activities, remember, multi-purpose activity, AA is able to do that one thing supremely well. The atmosphere of identification is preserved by the purity of focus, and alcoholics get help. This came from Narcotics Anonymous, because they weren't doing it either. All right, let's look at some semantic confusion here. All right. Actual implied sixth tradition long form. Clean and sober. It blurs our identification. Alcoholic and addict. Alcohol abuse disorder. I'm a junkie. Self-medicating. I'm a double winner. These come into our fellowship. They usually will not survive very long in AA groups because we'll be single-minded and we'll be three legacies. We'll understand our history. We'll understand why this is so important. Again, we're not using baseball bats, billy clubs, and we're not trying to straighten people out or be a jerk, because I don't think that really works in the long run. Affiliates us with therapeutic or clinical treatment, bipolar, addiction, trauma, clinical depression, anxiety disorder, or disease. Okay. Now, some of these problems we deal very well with in our own terminologies. Some of these are age-old problems. If you believe that these are conditions and complications that are outside the scope of AA, we're not in conflict with it, get the help that you need. I tell people on page 52, the bedevilments, if you believe those are symptoms of a spiritual malady that spiritual principles are the solution to, they can solve that problem that you have. If you believe that is a clinical diagnosis, then you need maybe some outside help, which is an outside issue. We're looking at the words here, not the problems. Okay, a lot of our members have had problems very similar to these wordings, and spiritual principles can deal effectively with those. And like I said, if you need some other stuff, that's fine. We're not in conflict, but we don't have to have it come back in our group and you be telling us all about it. Now, how about that word disease, that affiliation? Bill in 1961, he parted ways with that word at the National Catholic Convention on Alcoholism. And why he did that, because that word was becoming so popular in the treatment industry. And Jelinek, which was Bill Wilson's friend in the Yale studies, he wrote a book called The Disease Concept of Alcoholism in 1960 that became a big seller. Wilson, I think, saw the word disease as an affiliation now with the medical community and the treatment community and professional community, really. And what he did is he dissolved that and he said, wait, this disease concept is an outside issue. He said, we would rather refer to it in AA now as, in our big book, as an illness or a spiritual malady. And he said in this, and you can look at this, you can Google this, Ernie Kurtz research on this. Give me a second here. Oh, I'm just about out of time. I'm not going to go over that. You told me how much time. Okay. Conference approved literature, while it's so important, and I'll just go over it very quickly. If we start bringing in other books that we really like, and actually the conference approved literature says some areas do that. The only backdraw to that, if I like a book and you like a book, we can start bringing in our books. And I was in a meeting where they were using Melanie Beatty's meditation on codependency as a topic in an AA group, and the old timers were allowing the newcomer to do that. I spoke up about it, and it wasn't well received, but like I said, I don't use billy clubs and baseball bats. I brought it up. They didn't like what I said, and that was fine. That was their meeting. It wasn't a group. And they're entitled to be wrong if they want to. Bill said every group has the right to be wrong. And I haven't gone back to it. I'm not angry at them. It's just I'm not going to sit in a meeting like that and listen to non-AA literature. Okay. 2 more things, I'm finished. There are those who predict that AA may well become a spearhead of spiritual awakening throughout the world. When our friends say these things, they are both generous and sincere. But we of AA must reflect that such a tribute and such a prophecy could well prove to be a heady drink for most of us. That is, if we really came to believe that to be the real purpose of AA, and if we commence to behave accordingly. Our society, therefore, will prudently cleave to a single purpose, the carrying of the message to the alcoholic who still suffers. Let us resist the proud assumption that since God has enabled us to do well in one area, we are destined to be channeled of saving grace for everybody. And finally, 5th tradition. Shoemakers stick to the last. Better do one thing supremely well than many badly. That is the central theme of this tradition. Around it, our society gathers in unity. The very life of our fellowship requires the preservation of this principle. We have met the enemy, and the enemy is us. All right. I think I have finished.
Well, thank you, Mr. Al J. That was spectacular. Really appreciate you coming and doing this today. Let's see, I'm going to give everyone back their permissions to unmute themselves and restore the chat as well. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm sorry, let me stop the recording. Right now, let's see, what else do I have to share? I'm going to put into the chat all the information for contacts and posting of meetings, etc. And I will go right ahead and open the floor up to a show of hands. Anyone with questions for Mr. Al, please feel free to raise your hands. And Mr. Al, if you'd like to, you can call on them in order if you can see them.
All right, Deb.
Thank you so much, Al. My name is Deb. I'm an